ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जायमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 22, Prithu Maharaj's meeting with Kumaras. We are in the section where we are discussing answers by Sanat Kumar to Prithu Maharaj. So we are at text 28, 29. So 28. So here we'll see effect of the presence and absence of the subtle body. Text 28. आत्मानमिन्द्रियार्थं च परं यत् उभयोऽपि सत्याशय उपाधौ वै पुमान् पश्यति नान्यथा. Translation.
When the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to designations. But when one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. Purport. Being covered by material desires, a spirit soul is also considered to be covered by designations belonging to a particular type of body. Thus, he considers himself an animal, man, demigod, bird, beast, etc. In so many ways, he is influenced by false identification caused by false egoism, and being covered by illusory material desires, he distinguishes between matter and spirit. When one is devoid of such distinctions, there is no longer a difference between matter and spirit. At that time, the spirit is the only predominating factor. As long as one is covered by material desires, he thinks himself the master or the enjoyer. Thus, he acts for sense gratification and becomes subjected to material pangs, happiness, and distress. But when one is freed from such a concept of life, he is no longer subjected to designations, and he envisions everything as spiritual in connection with the Supreme Lord. This is explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.255. Anasaktasya vishayana yathar aham upayan unjataha nirbandaha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchyate. The liberated person has no attachment for anything material or for sense gratification. He understands that everything is connected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that everything should be engaged in the service of the Lord. Therefore, he does not give up anything. There is no question of renouncing anything because the Paramahamsa knows how to engage everything in the service of the Lord. Originally, everything is spiritual, nothing is material. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela 8.274, also it is explained that a Mahabhagavata, a highly advanced devotee, has no material vision. Sthavara Jangama dekhe, na dekhe taramurti, sarvatra yaya nija, ishtadeva spurti. Although he sees trees, mountains, and other living entities moving here and there, he sees all as the creation of the Supreme Lord, and with reference to the context sees only the creator and not the created. In other words, he no longer distinguishes between the created and the creator. He sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. He sees Krishna in everything and everything in Krishna. This is oneness. Hare Krishna.
So now, Sanat Kumar explains that the soul exists. When the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires. Right? So this is the desire is the root cause. Ichha dvesha samuttena. So desire, ichha dvesha samuttena. And thus becomes subjected to designations. When one is thus in a but when one is in transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Supreme Lord. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that being covered by the material desires, the living entity acquires designations, that is upadhi. So, living entity is pure, and progressively, as per his desires to enjoy the material creation, he attains various designations. Like sometimes he may become animal, man, demigod, bird, beast, and so many different ways. There is a false identification with the body created by the false ego. Right. So the engagement automatically leads to desires. And just imagine you are applying for a job and you get a job as a software developer. Vis-a-vis you get a job as a the say CEO of some grocery store. Now, because of the different identification, different engagements will be there, and different desires and plans will take place. Right, and this is exactly the case with the living entity when it's coming to the material world. So, as long as the living entity is covered with the material desires, he thinks he is the enjoyer. Ahankara vimodhatma karta ahamiti manyate. He thinks he is the enjoyer, he is the doer. But the real essence is one has to participate in the plan of the Lord, becoming the instrument and avoiding the doership. Right. This is Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. This is the trick of performing the activities. Otherwise, what happens is that the living entity wants to prove his purushartha somewhere, and he thinks he is the doer. And because he thinks he is the doer, he acts like a doer. What happens is that he is bound in the actions and reactions. So it is a very subtle thing. In the name of following the plan of the Lord, one should not become complacent. And in the name of working hard, one should not get into the idea that I am the doer. So the art of the work lies between these two extremes, and that is yoga karmasu kaushalam. And this is called as yukta vairagya. So very beautiful verse. We'll recite this verse. Anasaktasya vishayan
अनासक्तस्य विषयान्
यथार्हम् उपयुञ्जतः
यथार्हम्
यतारहम्
उपयुज्यतः
उपयुञ्जतः
निर्बन्धः कृष्णसम्बन्धे
निर्बन्धः
निर्बन्ध
कृष्णसम्बन्धे
सम्बन्धे
युक्तं वैराग्यमुच्यते.
युक्तं
युक्तं
वैराग्यमुच्यते
वैराग्यमुच्यते.
अनासक्तस्य विषयान्, he is not attached to the vishaya. Yatharham upayunjatah, but he is trying to engage everything in the service of the Lord. Krishna sambandhe, understanding ultimately anything and everything is related to Krishna. This is called as Yuktam Vairagya Muchyate. So Prabhupada writes here that there is no question of renunciation, right? What is the real question? The real question is not about renunciating everything. The question is about acquiring, understanding the proprietorship of the Supreme Lord, and engaging in the service of the Supreme Lord. And this is such a wonderful position, right? Instead of renouncing the family, one can be the part of the family, realizing these are Krishna's devotees who are I'm supposed to take care of them, and thus engaging the family in the service of the Lord, whatever way the family is being engaged, right? So this is the Yukta Vairagya principle. Prabhupada says everything is originally spiritual, right? Nothing is material. It is the consciousness of the living entity, like energy is energy. Nothing is called as hot energy because it is flowing through the electric heater. Nothing is called as cold energy because it is flowing through freezer. No. Energy is energy. Similarly, everything is spiritual. There is no question of material. And when one aligns one's vision with the vision of the Supreme Lord, one can start making everything into spiritual energy. And this is the vision of Mahabhagavad. And therefore, we'll recite another verse also, very beautiful verse. स्थावर जंगम देखे
स्थावर
स्थावर
जंगम
जंगम
देखे
देखे
न देखे तार मूर्ति
न देखे
न देखे तार मूर्ति
सर्वत्र है निज
सर्वत्र
सर्वत्र है निज
इष्ट देव स्फूर्ति.
इष्ट देव
इष्ट देव
So he will
मूर्ति.
not see Sthavar Jangam na dekhe. He will not dekhe Sthavar or Jangam. Sthavar means movable, immovable, Jangam means movable. He will not see this is what he will see. Sarvatra haya nija ishtadeva spurti. With reference to Krishna, one will identify this is energy of the Supreme Lord. Yomam paschati sarvatra. Sarvam chamai paschati. Tasyaham na pranashyami. Sachamena pranashyati. And Bhagavad Gita, the 10th chapter and 11th chapter is all about how to see Krishna everywhere. Ishtadeva Spurti. So this is how a devotee is established. Right? So identification leads to desires and desires leads to actions. But when the identification is, I am Krishna's devotee, I am Krishna Das, then whole thing is aligned properly. Text 29. Nimitte sati sarvatra जलादावपि पूरुषः आत्मनश्च परस्यापि भिदां पश्यति नान्यदा. Sorry. चेतनां हरते. I messed up. Text 29. निमित्ते सति सर्वत्र जलादावपि पूरुषः आत्मनश्च परस्यापि भिदां पश्यति नान्यदा. Translation.
Translation: only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others, just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. Purport: the spirit soul is one, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is manifested in Swamsa and Vibhinamsa expansions. The Jivas are Vibhinamsa expansions. The different incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are Swamsa expansions. Thus, there are different potencies of the Supreme Lord, and there are different expansions of the different potencies. In this way, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the same one principle, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding is real knowledge, but when the living entity is covered by the upadhi or designated body, he sees differences exactly as one sees differences in reflections of oneself on water, on oil, or in a mirror. When something is reflected on the water, it appears to be moving. When it is reflected on ice, it appears fixed. When it is reflected on oil, it appears hazy. The subject is one, but under different conditions, it appears differently. When the qualifying factor is taken away, the whole appears to be one. In other words, when one comes to the Paramahansa or perfectional stage of life by practicing Bhakti Yoga, he sees only Krishna everywhere. For him, there is no other objective. In conclusion, due to different causes, the living entity is visible in different forms as an animal, human being, demigod, tree, etc. Actually, every living entity is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 5.18, therefore, it is explained that one who actually sees the spirit soul does not distinguish between a learned Brahmana and a dog, an elephant or a cow. Pandita Samadarsinaha, one who is actually learned, sees only the living entity, not the outward covering. Differentiation is therefore the result of different karma or fruitive activities, and when we stop fruitive activities, turning them into acts of devotion, we can understand that we are not different from anyone else regardless of the form. This is only possible in Krishna consciousness. In this movement, there are many different races of men from all parts of the world participating, but because they think of themselves as servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they do not differentiate between black and white, yellow and red. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore the only means to make the living entities free of all designations. Hare Krishna.
Only because of the different causes does a person see the difference between himself and others. Right. So now the act of differentiation is because of seeing the different causes. Right. And thus, just like the reflection of the same person on the water, on the oil, or on the mirror will be completely different. Person is same, but if you keep the three pots, you keep a oil pot, you keep a the water pot, and we keep a mirror. The same person will be reflected differently. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the spirit soul is just the one, Satchidananda, the Supreme Lord, who has expanded himself as Swamsha, which are the Vishnu Tattva expansions, and Vivinnamsha, the various living entity. Why? For the sake of enjoyment, right? For the sake of Anandamayodhyasat, the Supreme Lord expands himself eternally, right? So all the living entities, they are one in the sense they are all, the origin of them is the one, the Supreme Lord, and the constitution of that living entity is the same, Satchidananda. And principle is also same, that is giving happiness to the Supreme and thus deriving the happiness. Right. Rishikena, Rishikesha Sevanam. Although the same one principle, but when the living entity is covered by different upadhi, and this different upadhi will be coming from the three modes of material nature, what happens is that the living entity appears completely different. Bhagavad Gita explains Vidya Vinaya Sampanna Brahmana. Just imagine just imagine something like a South Indian Brahmana who is Vidya, who is, who knows the perfect. Like recently, one boy from this Ahilyanagar, he, completed this yoga mantras, Veda mantras and everything. So, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, Brahmana, Gavi, consider a cow, Hastini, consider elephant, Shuni Chaiva, consider a dog, and Shvapakecha, consider one who is dog eater, right? Panditaha Samadarshina. Prabhupada says here that one who actually is learned sees the living entity and not the outward covering, although he will behave with the living entities differently. Essentially, from the spiritual platform, there is no difference between the snake and a cow because both are living entities. One is heavily influenced by the mode of ignorance and Rajogun and Tamogun. One is influenced by the mode of Sattvagun. But both souls are equally divine. Although by the conditioning of the three modes of material nature, they have acquired different upadhi. Right. The differentiation is therefore is the result of different karma or the fruitive activities. And when the living entities stop the fruitive activities, turning them into the acts of devotion, we can understand that we are not different from everyone else, regardless of the form. And this is possible only in Krishna consciousness. Right. It is just like, four brothers. One is wearing yellow shirt, one is wearing black shirt, one is wearing red shirt. And they will, one is identified, oh, I'm black, I'm yellow. No, you are basically brothers. You are basically the same, belonging to the same origin. You are same, the son of the Supreme Lord, but you have acquired the different race based on Karanam Gunasangasya Sad Asad Yoni Janmasu. And Prabhupada says this kind of understanding is possible only when we keep God in the center, Krishna in the center. And therefore, in our Krishna consciousness, one day, His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, he was giving a lecture with His Holiness Sachinandan Swami Maharaj. Okay. And they are the generation of, look at their age. Both are in 70s now, 70s. And they are so Radhanath Swami Maharaj is coming from the Jew background, and Sachinandan Swami Maharaj is coming from the Nazi background. Okay. And the Second World War and, the chemistry between the Jews and the Nazis. And Maharaj was saying that, a Jew and a Nazi embracing each other and dancing in Krishna consciousness is possible only in the mission of Krishna consciousness because Krishna is in the center. Right. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore only means to make the living entities free from all designations. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tat paratvena nirmalam. Right. Text 30. So from text 30 to 34, attachment to sense gratification is the cause of samsara. So this is the theme 30 to 34, that how the attachment to the sense gratification is the cause of the samsara. Text 30. इन्द्रियैर्विषयैराकृष्ट आक्षिप्तं ध्यायतं मनः चेतनां हरते बुद्धे स्तम्भं तोयं Ivardhat. Translation.
When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense object, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. Like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Purport. In this verse, it is very nicely explained how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted and we gradually become almost completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the previous verse, it is recommended that we should always keep in touch with the devotional service of the Lord so that the blazing fire of devotional service can gradually burn into ashes material desires, and we can become liberated from the repetition of birth and death. This is also how we can directly keep our staunch faith in the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness by our continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. If one takes up the sannyasa order of life but is still not able to control the mind, he will think of objects of sense gratification, namely family, society, expensive house, etc. Even though he goes to the Himalaya or the forest, his mind will continue thinking of the object of sense gratification. In this way, gradually, one's intelligence will be affected. When intelligence is affected, one loses his original taste for Krishna consciousness. The example given here is very appropriate. If a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. The water dries up. Similarly, when the big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used by them, and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world, and thus we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires towards the transcendental loving service, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. Hare Krishna.
Now in this verse, Sanat Kumarji explains, when mind and senses are attracted to the sense objects, mind becomes agitated. And thus one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. And then he gives a beautiful example. Just like the water in the lake is gradually sucked up by the big kusha grass on its banks and becomes stambha. And the purport Srila Prabhupada explains that this verse very nicely explains how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted and we become completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme. Chaitanya Charitamrita has a beautiful verse, very famous verse, right? Krishna bhuliya ji bhogavancha kare nikatastha maya tara japatiya dhare. That Krishna bhuliya, forgetful of Krishna, and then he completely bhogam nikatastha maya tara. So this is how the Kushagras will capture that water and will make it into stambha. Although the natural positioning of the water is to always flow. Prabhupada says here that when we allow our mind to think of the sense gratification continuously, then it becomes the cause of our material bondage. So what we are thinking of is very important. What the inputs we are giving into, right? And this is Prabhupada says, and then Prabhupada gives the example. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness by continuous practice, we cannot forget the sense objects. And gradually the intelligence will be affected. With this we very classically see in the case of Ajamil. Ajamil saw a wrong picture. Wrong picture means the wrong incident. And then somehow that stayed in the mind of Ajamil, and therefore that completely deviated Ajamil from the path of dharma towards adharma. And therefore controlling the mind, especially what we think of, dhyayato, vishayan, pumsaha, sangasteshu pajayate, right? And gradually this intelligence will be affected. Indriyanam hi charatam yan mano anuvidhiyate tadasya harati prajnam vayurnavam ivambasi. The mind focused on one of the senses excessively can have this problem. Recently, we were attending one class by His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, and he made a very wonderful point. He said that whenever we see some, the Tejasvi object, somebody who is, a very wonderful prasadam, or somebody who is very handsome or beautiful, so instead of thinking as Vishaya for me, one should think it is as Vaibhava of the Supreme Lord. Very beautiful point he was thinking. Vishaya versus Vaibhava. That don't think that it is Vishaya for your enjoyment. Think it as the Vaibhava of the Supreme Lord and the spark of the splendor, which is the coming from the Supreme Lord. Like that it is. Further, Srila Prabhupada explains, there is an example is given appropriate is the big lake is covered with the dry grass, and what will happen? Water will be sucked by the grass and will make it into a stambha. Where water is supposed to naturally flow, now the water and be on the horizontal position, water will become vertical and will be completely sthavara instead of becoming jangama. And this is the same thing is happening with the living entity. But Prabhupada says, when we turn our desires, when our desires are purified, automatically the whole direction taken will be completely different. We cannot kill the desires, Prabhupada says. If we constantly, we cannot kill the desires has to be engaged and have a proper designation. And then Prabhupada writes something, only Prabhupada can write this. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. So this is very important for our devotees. Right. Many times, that we want to, assist in the greater cause. Yeah, we want to, no doubt about it. We want to be part of the Hindu Sammelans. Yeah, we want to, no doubt about it. But at the same time, our primary identity, that a devotee assisting the social cause should not be, taken over by somebody that we started as a spiritual mission and slowly now we are in the social mission. It should not happen. Prabhupada writes here very clearly. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. And therefore, whenever, especially when we take something which is on the peripheral service, one should be vigilant about the periphery service that we are doing. We have seen enough number of devotees, completely migrating from one domain to another domain by remaining on the periphery. Therefore, primarily we should be known as Krishna's devotees, right? Devotees who is like Gita Bhagavata is the goal of their life, chanting is the goal of their life, and doing many other things. Yes, it is not about not contributing to the society, but while contributing to the society, one should not get covered over by various identity, which ultimately become the cause of further bondage. So we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय,
जय
गौर भक्त वृंद की जय. Thank you,
जय
Prabhupada. Thank
थैंक
you,
यू
everyone.
प्रभुपाद
Hare
थैंक यू
Krishna.
प्रभु जी थैंक यू एवरीवन
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Prabhupada.
Prabhuji.
Thank you,
Hare
Prabhuji. Thank
Krishna.
you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.